Hello everyone and welcome to the Healthy Habits video series. This is session 1 and today we're going to talk about nutrients from our food. Specifically, we're going to have a close look at nutrient travel in our body and why it's true that we are what we eat. We're going to look at whole foods versus processed foods. Why is this important? How do we differentiate the two? And then we're going to delve a little deeper into nutrients. What are the types of nutrients our bodies need? What are the best food sources? So let's kick it off with having a look at nutrient travel in our body. We've got an example here of eating an apple. So we chew the apple in our mouth. We swallow the apple. It travels down our esophagus into our stomach. When it arrives in our stomach, these acids break the food down into tiny pieces. And those pieces continue down into our intestines. Here in our intestines is where the nutrients from our food are absorbed into our body. Now, we're going to come back to this in a moment. After the nutrients from our food are absorbed, there is a part of food that continues down through the intestines, through our digestive system. And this part is largely made up of something called fiber, which is a really important part of our whole foods. Now, what fiber does is it keeps moving through our digestive system, and it almost acts like a sponge, cleaning up our digestive system, grabbing all our waste that we don't need in our body. A lot of those waste from, say, processed foods, but other processes in our body. It attaches it to itself, and you probably guess what's happening. It becomes our feces. And this is how we remove a lot of the waste from our bodies. So now let's go back to the intestines. So again, this is where the nutrients are absorbed from our food into our body. Those nutrients are absorbed into the bloodstream. And these food nutrients literally travel through our blood to the cells in our body. And I think this is really important to connect because those food nutrients arrive at really important sites like our brain. When they get to our brain, they heavily influence the mood that we're in. They influence the decisions that we make during the day, how we process information. So they travel to all the cells in our body, but like I said, I think it's really important to connect a lot of these important sites to show us how these food nutrients really influence the way that we feel and the way that we function during the day. Places like our muscles and our bones, to keep our bones strong, to give our muscles enough energy to be able to play in the park with our kids. So really, we are what we eat. Okay, this food that goes in really does influence who we are during the day. All right, let's move on. So whole foods and processed foods. Whole foods on the left-hand side there. These are foods in their natural form from our environment. They are complete nutrient packages. And that's really important because we're really lucky that this food that comes straight from our environment, like our fruits and our veggies, a lot of our lean meats and our seafoods and grains and beans, they're already stocked full of the nutrients our bodies need in the right amounts. So for this reason, we can trust whole foods and our bodies need a variety of them, okay, because these nutrients work as a team. If we go over to the right-hand side here, processed foods. So these are foods and ingredients that have been altered. They've got added ingredients in them, often artificial ingredients, colors, flavorings, preservatives. They've gone through processing quite often. So an example of this is, like being cooked at really high temperatures or being deep fried, where the structure of the food is changed and also the nutrients that are within them. So they become incomplete nutrient packages. That nutrients balance has been disrupted in the food. So we can't trust processed foods. We need to check food labels of processed foods. And obviously right at the bottom there, processed foods can have negative effects on our health and in fact, and our future food choices. We all would have heard a lot about obesity and diabetes and heart disease and stroke and how these are really heavily influenced by our food choices. So if we look at the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, so this food plate here, which a lot of us would have seen, this is sort of, I guess, the most updated version of that old food pyramid. And this contains a wide variety of whole foods that are available to us in our environment. Okay, so all of these foods inside that Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, you can be sure these are whole foods from something you can plant, pick, grow, catch, feed. So let's have a look at nutrients a little closer. So generally speaking, they can be grouped into two categories. So we've got macronutrients and micronutrients. What are these? Let's have a look. So macronutrients, these are the energy that our bodies rely on. So food energy. There's three main types of food energy. We've got carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Now, these are in fact found in all foods. Okay, there are some that might be higher in carbohydrates or higher in fats, but they are found in all foods, and they're required in large amounts by our bodies. So let's have a closer look at carbohydrates. So I think there's been a lot of recent negative attention around carbohydrates. You know, you would have heard about cutting out carbs, for example. And is this the right advice? I think the better question is, where are our carbohydrates coming from? And if they're coming from whole foods, we can trust them. So whole foods like fruits, veggies, whole grains. So what we mean by that word there, whole grains, is things like your rice and your pasta and your breads, your cereals, that those grains are as close as possible to their natural form. So the outer casing or the outer layer of that grain is still intact, and that's where all the nutrients and fiber are located. So a good example is a brown rice as opposed to white rice. So brown rice has still got that outer layer of the grain intact, whereas white rice doesn't, and unfortunately is lacking a lot of those really important nutrients and fiber that our bodies need. So whole foods that are high in carbohydrates are linked to positive health outcomes. And if we have another look at this Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, foods that we consider to be high in carbohydrates, so we're talking our grains, our cereals, pasta, but then also our fruits and our vegetables are foods that are high in carbohydrates. So as long as they're coming from foods that are whole foods, we can trust them, and they are in fact good for our health. Fats. So let's have a closer look at fats. Bad fats, good fats. Again, I think the take-home point is very similar to carbohydrates. We can trust the fats from our whole foods. You might have heard talk about omega-3s. So one of the building blocks of fats from our food are fatty acids. And there's a certain type called omega-3 fatty acids, and there's a lot of research linking higher consumption of foods that are high in these and really important health outcomes or positive health outcomes. So these are found in larger amounts in fatty fishes like your salmon and tuna and sardines, as well as nuts and seeds and plant-based oils. And they've definitely, there's a lot of evidence mounting now that they're linked to positive health outcomes. So much so that the general recommendation is 2 serves of fish each week to make the most of these nutrients. So again, going back to the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, whole foods that are generally considered to be high in these fats, again, our fatty fish, nuts and seeds, plant-based oils. They are contained throughout our whole foods here, but those are some foods that are particularly high in these fats. Proteins. How much protein do I need? In actual fact, if we have a look at the population data, on a whole in Australia, we generally get more than enough protein in our diets. It's probably more important to ask, when do I need it? And so there's mounting evidence showing that we actually need small, regular consumption of foods high in proteins throughout the day, because at one time, our body can only absorb and utilize a certain amount of protein. And again, if we look at the population data, it tends to suggest that most of us load our dinner in particular, our later meals of the day, with protein-rich foods, but not so much earlier in the day. So it's really important for protein that we're eating foods that are higher in protein throughout the day, small, regular portions, and that it's combined with regular exercise. And that is important to help our bodies to absorb and utilize protein more effectively. So I think protein we generally consider to be associated with as a building blocks of our skeletal muscle, and indeed it is, as well as a lot of other processes in our body. Just like carbohydrates and fats, variety is key. So the building blocks of proteins are called amino acids. And there are certain amino acids that our bodies can't produce by themselves. They need to get them from foods called essential amino acids. And so to ensure that our body's getting these, we need to eat a variety of foods that are high in proteins. And again, we can trust proteins from our whole foods. So going back to the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, again, our whole foods are generally considered to be high in proteins. We're looking at our fish, seafoods, our lean meats, our nuts, our seeds, poultry, also our dairy as well is a really important source. And again, proteins are found throughout these whole foods on the plate here, but those are just some that are particularly high. So let's have a look at the second group. We've looked at macronutrients. What are micronutrients? So these are nutrients that are required in smaller amounts by our bodies, but they are extremely important and are involved in pretty much every bodily function. So it's really important for things like our immunity, for example, to fight off bugs, the way that messages are sent throughout our body through the nervous system, the way our brain functions. And again, and I know we've said this so many times already, but variety is vital. Micronutrients work as a team and need to be in the right balance. So when we're talking micronutrients, we're talking vitamins and minerals. Two broad groups of vitamins: water-soluble vitamins that our body has a hard time storing. So that means that we need to be consuming them regularly from our food. Whereas fat-soluble vitamins, our body can store or finds it easier to store. But that means that if we're eating too much of one food, that we can actually build up too much of a particular vitamin. And that's important because, as we said, we need these nutrients in the right amount. They work as a team and they need to be in the right balance. And minerals there, a lot of them will be familiar to you. Some of them might not be. But again, a take-home point is we need to consume a wide variety of whole foods to make sure that we're getting all of these, because they all have extremely important functions in our body. When we're talking nutrients, I think it's important to consider, am I missing out? Are there nutrients I'm not getting? I think the take-home point, again, is as long as we're eating a wide variety of those whole foods, we should be getting all the nutrients that we need. But the list on the left here is probably some situations where we might be more prone to missing out. So if we've got particular dietary restrictions, certain health conditions, or in particular during these life stages, there are nutrients that we particularly need enough of during childhood, pregnancy, as we're aging. Some of the more common nutrient deficiencies in Australia are listed here. But I think what I want to get across here is just, if you think that you might be, I guess, more prone to missing out on nutrients, particular nutrients, because of something that might be listed here on the left, your go-to for advice that's specific to your situation is your GP and your dietitian. They can give you specific dietary advice for you. So the take-home messages from this session today: we eat foods, not nutrients. Okay, that's really important. And if we're eating that wide range of whole foods, we don't have to worry about nutrient supplements because we're getting them in the foods that we eat in the right amount. Trust whole foods. They are the complete nutrient package. Nutrients work best in the right team, and that's why we need a variety of them and not just the same food all the time. Processed foods, we've got to be suspicious. We've got to read the label. We can't trust them. Check out these references here from this video series. If you want more information, here's some great references. Thanks so much for joining us.